South Asian Americans are a growing racial group in the United States and make up a large portion of the U.S. immigrant population. Many South Asian clients speak more than one language. How can we help our clients be heard, even in their own language? As therapists, how do we create an affirming experience for South Asian clients? What cultural messages are meant when clients are brief in their responses or defer to us to take the lead in a therapeutic session? Welcome to People of Color in Psychology, the show that explores mental health topics specific to culture, diversity, and communities of color. I am your host, Jack Zen. Today's guest in our AAPI series, we have Dr. Srivastav. She is a South Asian clinical psychologist in her private practice called Evergreen Psychotherapy. Dr. Srivastav is bilingual in English and Hindi and specializes in social anxiety, depression, trauma, OCD, disordered eating, and mental health issues related to cultural mismatch. Trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, emotion-focused therapy, and motivational interviewing, Dr. Srivastav will be sharing her insights into working with South Asian clients. Notably, in her clinical and professional journey with two different cultures, Dr. Srivastav will also discuss the shedding of Western psychotherapy ideas and finding a space to offer more inclusive and culturally responsive mental health treatment. Dr. Srivastav, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me, Jack. It's really good to be here.
You bet. Tell me about your journey and how you got into this work.
Sure. So I did a lot of my initial training in India, and then I did my PhD in the US. And well, first of all, the training in India is still a little more informal and it's a little more unstructured because there are a lot of different people, a lot of different languages, and still a lot of options in terms of the therapy techniques that you're choosing to be trained in. However, in my training in the US, there was, well, first of all, English is the main language for most educational experiences. And in addition to that, there was an emphasis on a CBT training where you really try and do away with cultural values, or you try and give a training that isn't focused on any cultural values so that theoretically it could apply to a whole lot more people. And so all of my training was in CBT, and I worked primarily with Caucasian persons. So that was the very first contrast in where I started my training and then where I completed my training.
Can you say a little bit more of some of the distinctions?
So I think it might be best to talk about how my current work shows those distinctions. So just as, as a provider in our very first session, we are asking our clients a lot of questions. We're doing the intake, we're extracting all this information. However, in the first session with my clients, a lot of whom are South Asian folk, I can tell that they've never been in therapy before and they're very unfamiliar with the process. And so what kind of happens is they're really looking for me to lead the session. So I'm trying to ask them questions and get information about their emotional distress. And I'm getting these really brief 1 to 2 word responses. And sometimes my clients are keeping their responses short because they're showing me respect. They're calling me Dr. Srivastav. They're giving me the opportunity to lead the conversation. Sometimes they're keeping their responses short because they are waiting for me to tell them what to do.
Because you're talking about, so when clients, they're being brief in their response, rather than seen as resistance, you're creating a cultural context for, wow, this is actually demonstration of respect. I'm letting the therapist lead.
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely. And again, I also want to point out that they're unfamiliar with how therapy goes, or they don't have the right expectations. So a lot of the times they're not asking questions because they don't know enough to ask. It's not a sign that they're demotivated or checked out. It's just that they don't know where to begin. So that can seem like a roadblock in the beginning, that they're not asking questions, they're not sharing information, but really it's coming from a place of they're letting me show them the ropes or take that space, tell them what to do. Those are the things that they're expecting from me.
Mm-hmm. And wow, so we've actually just immediately dived into your work, and I really have a lot of questions about that. I am wondering, just from our listeners' standpoint, for them to also get to know you, can you tell us your journey of how did you get into doing clinical psychology?
Oh my gosh, my journey. Honestly, Jack, I got up one morning and I decided I was going to be a psychologist.
Really?
Well, really, and I was just a teenager, so I think teenage angst might have something to do with it. But yeah, I used to find people and relationships difficult, as do most teenagers. They were more difficult than math and science, so I decided I would be a psychologist, or I would study people. And then I made the shift from research to practice because I worked across a couple of research labs. Research is rigorous, it's nuanced, it's detailed, it's great, but if it's it's the movie script, and therapy is the actual live action movie. That's how
Mm,
I
mm.
started to feel, because I could see those changes in action. And then, of course, the research is still very much limited to Caucasian persons, to sometimes college students. So I could see that it wasn't really matching with my experiences as a lived person. Uh,
Yeah.
that
Yeah, I
which-
would imagine the challenges if you did a research study with predominantly just South Asian population, how it would be very difficult to recruit that. And as you're saying, only college students is usually
Mm,
the population we have access to.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So it sounds like from teenage years you thought, hey, I want to get into psychology. This is another curiosity, just thinking about the other guest speakers and a common
Hmm.
indication or report from folks in the field, which is at least in the Asian culture, psychology or mental health is very foreign, is a very foreign idea.
Hmm.
So, did you know in advance that there was this thing called psychology?
It was offered as a subject in my school, and that was it.
Oh, okay.
So I knew about that, but what it meant to be a psychologist, I didn't know. So it was a very impulsive decision that I took, as teenagers are bound to do. And I think that was actually one of the biggest challenges that I faced, because the loneliness that I experienced in my journey of trying to be a psychologist, a South Asian psychologist, because I could not find mentors, or I could not find mentors who looked like me. I could not find information about what a psychologist does. And even
Oh.
today, even though I am a licensed psychologist, professionally, I am very often the only South Asian in the room. So it sets you up to be a little bit lonely among your colleagues at work. And then within my own circle of family and friends, I'm the only mental health professional.
Mm, mm.
So there are ways in which you don't fit in wherever you go, and that can be isolating. It can wear you down a little bit.
Now, remind me the timing. When did you come to the States?
So I came here in 2011.
Okay.
Mhm.
So, did you do undergrad?
Yes,
And
I did my undergrad. And although I had some mentors, most of the mentors had chosen to teach or be, again, part of the university setting where there weren't research labs. So there's still a lack of funding for research at the undergrad level, at the graduate level. So
hmm.
it was difficult to find a mental health practitioner and get mentoring, because everything was still shrouded in secrecy. And it's opening up as we speak. But as a profession, the default role was to become a teacher of psychology.
Oh, a faculty member, teacher, instead of being a clinician.
Yes, and
Huh.
and at the same time, uh, it was completely acceptable to be a psychiatrist, because people are still more willing to seek medication.
Yeah, the medical model.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, in thinking about your work or message, what are some things you want to share with other providers about your work?
I mean, so first of all, I want to clarify that I'm speaking to my work and my experience with South Asian persons, so it doesn't apply to everyone. But like I mentioned, just from the very first session, my clients are a little more reticent, a little more distant, appear distant, and they really want to know what to do. They want to know how to solve their problem, and they're asking for instructions. They have a strict treatment protocol that they can use to solve their problems. and I like their motivation, but I'm not getting information about their emotional experiences and the distress and the issues that have brought them in. So my effort to ask them open-ended questions or validate their feelings, my clients aren't responsive to them because they're expecting instructions. And sometimes they're not elaborating because they're not familiar talking about emotions and their experiences. And finally, a lot of my clients are bilingual or multilingual. And as we know from research, like people who speak multiple languages, each language is differentially associated with their emotional experiences. And sometimes it's the native language and not English that is the preferred language when it comes to discussing intense emotional experiences. So that's another barrier that I sometimes face with my clients of South Asian descent who are multilingual.
So their default or original first language is, say in this case, maybe Hindi, just
Mhm.
and then so they're using Hindi to describe their inner world and emotional experience. So how do you help them with that barrier that you're talking about?
Well, the barrier is that they're typically using English more because Hindi becomes the language that they speak at home and English is the outside language. So in therapy, they are sticking to English and they reassure me that they're competent and fluent in English. But in what I tell them is that this isn't about competence or fluency, this is about your emotional experiences. And this is about getting practice at describing those emotional experiences. And so you can go between languages. Like sometimes I really have to role model code switching or just going between the languages that I know to help them understand that their emotional experiences can be better understood or better elaborated if they give themselves access to all the tools that they have.
I would
Because
imagine, yeah.
yeah.
I would imagine this makes therapy way more complicated because, for one, most people are already having difficulty describing anxiety, depression. We ask, wait, what do you mean by anxiety? Anxiety isn't really an emotion. And now you're broadening that landscape of the definition to include both English and their native language.
Yeah, and because like I said, they're responding in these really concise, brief ways, like, one to two word responses when I'm asking them questions. So I want to say, use whatever language you want to. Say whatever it is you feel in whatever language you feel. Because otherwise it becomes a very stilted process of using a set of rules, a particular language to describe emotional experiences, and they haven't had practice in that. So the first few sessions, again, it goes from me trying to get information from them to saying, okay, what is the best way for you to identify and share this information? And how
Wow.
can I teach you about therapy and how therapy works so that you can organize your internal experiences and then share them with me? So there's a lot of mentoring and teaching that I do in the first few sessions to help them understand that their full participation, emotional and otherwise, is really, really critical to therapy.
Wow, that's such a powerful question as you're saying that because I don't think I've ever asked that question. And it's because oftentimes we teach clients, at least in the Western approach, psychoeducation. Here's what therapy looks like. Here's why we, help you confront your avoidance safety behaviors and so on, from the anxiety model. But
Mhm,
we rarely consider, well, how can we help you express your inner world and dialogue and emotions? How can we draw that out
mhm.
so that I can do an assessment?
Yeah, sometimes my clients are really hesitant to go between languages, especially if their native language is one that I don't understand. Because, I mean, South Asia, and I can speak to India, which is where I'm from, there's a different language for each state. So my clients don't want to use their native language, but then I tell them that, look, you're not just talking to me, you're talking to yourself. And you're hearing yourself, you're understanding yourself. So that is still of value because my South Asian clients have difficulty elaborating on their emotional experience. So I tell them that that's one way to at least bridge that gap for themselves.
Using your native language, even if someone doesn't understand.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. To know yourself. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also helps them, again, make the process of therapy familiar for them and for them to feel a sense of competence in something that is in therapy, which is unfamiliar, which is secretive, which has a stigma. So it's essentially them starting to belong or get that sense of feeling that they can belong in therapy with whatever it is that they get to the table.
You're creating a space for them to belong, to feel like they belong. And that
Hmm.
requires them feeling like they're heard.
Hmm.
Mm, okay. So now I want to shift gears here, just some questions that's come up for me. And that is when we're thinking about, like for instance, you mentioned you provide treatment with, say, OCD and anxiety, and that's an area that I specialize in. So if we were to do like CBT and exposure treatment for
Hmm.
these clients, South Asian clients that are struggling with these particular issues, is it taught the same way, say, when you were in India? The concept was it CBT Eurocentric theories, or how did you have to navigate those two things?
So the theories were definitely taught the same way. I think the difference that I see in my work now is that my clients will sometimes they will ask me, this is the most common question. They'll say, "How long will this take? When will I be okay?"
Yes.
And so they're really looking for a guarantee, or a certainty that I do therapy and then I'm fine. And I think, again, that comes from unfamiliarity with therapy. And also, this sometimes they're asking because they want to know when treatment will end. Sometimes they're asking because therapy is a secret. And so they want it to end quickly. I'm drifting from your question a little bit, but they haven't ever had a Psych 101 on CBT and exposure therapy or anything else related to psychology. So they're focused on what do I need to do? How can I follow whatever it is that has to be done so that I am out of therapy as soon as possible?
Mm, mm. And how might you address that, just from your experience?
So my clients are looking for a guarantee, right? And a lot of my clients are in Silicon Valley. They are highly educated, they're working professionals. And so I basically ask them when they question me, how long is it going to take? I'd say, well, how long did it take for you to be an engineer? Or how long did your recent project at work take? Because what I found is that when I start giving them parallels from therapy to their life, and whether it's school experiences or work experiences, it becomes really meaningful to them. Because what I say is that, look, therapy is learning a lot of professional, highly specialized skills. You are learning how to manage your anxiety. You're learning how to manage your intrusive thoughts and impulses. And so what
Mm,
that means is that learning will take time. And so, yes, you will get better if you attend therapy, if you do the homework, and if nothing else changes. So I'm giving them a guarantee, but I'm giving them a very conditional guarantee. And that really resonates with them because it also helps reduce this pressure that they're putting on themselves to get better quickly and as efficiently as possible.
mm.
So, yeah, I try and give them an informed answer about their treatment progress. And I use their experiences with school and with work, especially here in the US, because many of them are immigrants. So I try and compare that to give them a more reasonable expectation of progress.
Yeah. So it sounds like the reframe and using their experiences, their work, like reframing psychotherapy more so as a skill development when it comes to interpersonal interactions and
Mm.
management of emotions.
Like I mentioned before, I temporarily take on this teaching role of what therapy is about. And I encourage them to see therapy as an education in who they are and what their reactions are, and what to do when these reactions aren't the ones they were hoping for. Because what happens is people, some of my clients will have this expectation that they will never experience anxiety again once they're done with therapy, or they'll never have an intrusive thought. And you and I both know as providers that anxiety will always be around. You just get better at handling it, or you have a better set of techniques to fall back on to manage that anxiety. So again, aligning their expectation of what a cure is for their problem versus what we actually do in therapy, which is teach these skills, teach these techniques to help them significantly improve their quality of life.
Now, something I want to pinpoint is this. I don't know if I'm detecting something in terms of a difference and trying to break down the Western perspective of problems. When you mentioned how they're coming in to work on their problems, I saw air quotes. For our listeners who didn't see the air quotes, what was behind the air quotes? Like, how are you thinking about how your clients are thinking about problems? And I'm also air quoting that.
Yeah. The most striking difference I've seen between Caucasian clients and South Asian clients is that Caucasian clients will approach therapy a lot more easily. They will come when their problem starts. So let's just go with they're experiencing a phobia, right? Social phobia. And so they'll seek therapy quickly, and then we get to work on it. Now, South Asian clients will experience social phobia, and then it will fester and their anxiety will get worse, and then the family's involved, or there's a lot more shame and guilt that develops before they come to therapy. So by the time they've come to therapy, sure, I'm going to try and address their social phobia, but now I'm also addressing all the impact that their family and friends have had, or the way in which their mental health issue has kind of grown to impact their self-esteem, their relationship with everybody, and how everybody sees them. So it kind of becomes twofold. Yes, you're addressing, say, the OCD or the social phobia, but you're also addressing what the cultural aspect of it is, which is my parents didn't want me to come for treatment, or, they told me that this was a waste of money. So there's that aspect, which also needs to be addressed in therapy alongside treating the social phobia or treating the OCD. So it becomes twofold.
Thanks for sharing that. You're bringing in the social-cultural interactions and conflicts, bringing that into the space of therapy. Okay. Now, what is one recommendation you would give to therapists, professionals, or faculty members who are working with trainees or clients who are South Asian?
That is a good question. I think the loneliness, like I mentioned before, whether as a South Asian provider or even as a South Asian client who's attending therapy, I think that can be a real barrier to understanding therapy's impacts on you, understanding your training impact on you. And so to encourage some sense of community, that would be, I think, really important. And again, leading from that, it's also this idea that you give them a sense of competence. And right now I'm talking more about my clients in therapy, but I definitely try and give them a sense of competence in their therapeutic endeavors because it's something they've never done before. It's something that is still shrouded in secrecy and stigma, and they've come because it's their last resort. Which is also why they're desperately asking me for what exactly do I do to get better, instead of focusing on their lived experience. So give your clients a sense of competence, give your trainees and your students a sense of competence, and encourage them to build community by acknowledging your limitations as a provider or as a professor, and by acknowledging that cultural mismatch, essentially, that look, you're South Asian, or you're South Asian amongst a whole bunch of people who aren't. What does that do to you?
Yeah. To be able to ask beyond, are you getting your work done? Are you getting your publications in? How's the lack of representation affecting you?
Mhm.
Mm. So the other thing that I also ask my guest speaker is thinking about your journey up till now. Can you share with me some of the challenges that you faced as a South Asian psychologist and how you overcame that?
Like I mentioned before, the loneliness is very much there. So I try and keep up a sense of community with other South Asian providers. I think in addition to that, realizing how flexible my therapy style has to be and how much I have to step away from my original trainings has been an important realization because every time you learn something, you want to do that well. But then when you see that it's not working well, you have to devise new ways of doing therapy because the population has changed or the problem has changed. And there's a lot of apprehension in saying, well, okay, I'm going to do therapy in two languages and I'm going to encourage my client to speak in a language I don't understand. Like you're really afraid of where you're going to drop the ball. So there's a lot of apprehension and anxiety that comes to reinventing your therapy style constantly because there aren't the providers or there isn't as much community or there's no research, right? I still don't see much research on the impact of therapy in multiple languages. So you're kind of going it alone a little bit. So you're going to have to balance that apprehension along with that confidence that you are making informed choices that serve your clients best. Otherwise, you're going to be restricting yourself, you're going to feel isolated, and that is exactly how your client is also feeling.
Mm. Yeah, the parallel process.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So, Dr. Srivastav, what's another final thought you might have for our listeners?
Final thought I have is that my South Asian clients are some of the most motivated persons that I have met. However, for all of the reasons that we discussed today, they can seem unengaged, they can seem brusque, they can seem like they don't buy into therapy. And again, giving them a sense of competence, giving them a sense that they're doing well in therapy is one of the important ways in which you can have them stick around to actually see the benefits of therapy. Because nobody wants to stay in a space where they feel ineffective or where they feel foolish. So it is this fine balance of teaching and mentoring my South Asian clients in what therapy looks like, and also saying, okay, these are the things you practiced and you did well. Because my South Asian clients, again, very hardworking, highly educated, they're expecting from themselves constant progress. They're expecting that I've seen you for 6 sessions, Dr. Srivastav, so why aren't I better? And so I have to tell them, you know what? Sometimes getting the same grade semester after semester, that's progress, right? And so when I say that and say you've been doing the same skills for 6 weeks, and that's great, and that is progress, it helps them feel like, okay, they can do therapy. They have managed to be effective at something they didn't understand 6 weeks ago because they're realizing that their own expectations of progress and what progress looks like was a little out of line.
Well, thank you very much for your time and the important work that you're doing. Now, how can listeners reach you?
You can go find out more information about me on my website. That's www.evergreen-psychotherapy.com. You can Google my name. I'm on several directories.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
For sure. Thank you, Jeff.
A huge thank you to our listeners. If you like what you've heard, please share and subscribe to our podcast, People of Color in Psychology.